Well, the answer to the first question, 6'7". The answer to the second question is illustrated. The second question, by the way, is what actually is a futurist? What do you do? I met a futurist many years ago who told the following true story about his own experience. He was invited to spend a day on retreat with the board and the executives of an international aluminum company in Florida, talking about the long-term future and what it meant for this company. At the end of the day, there was to be a party at the vacation home of the chairman of the aluminum company. He was invited. So he got in a cab and he went out to the vacation home. Now from there, he was going to go to the airport to fly back home, so he carried a suitcase along with him. And when he got to the home, got out of the cab, walked up to the front door, rang the doorbell, and the wife of the chairman of the aluminum company came to the door and opened it, and he said, "Hello, I'm David, I'm the futurist." And she looked more than a little bit surprised and said, "Oh, I didn't realize my husband arranged for entertainment." And seeing the suitcase, she said, "Well, you probably want a place to change into your costume. Follow me down this hallway." And so she saw purple gowns, crystal balls, and somebody who would be there to forecast or foretell the future. Now, those of us who work professionally as futurists do spend some time trying to study trends and events and developments and ask, what do they mean for us in our particular businesses? I want to answer the third question, though. And the third question you might have is, why spend some time thinking about the future? I'm so busy just keeping up with the present. How could I possibly devote any time to thinking about the future? And it takes me to the person who really taught me to be a futurist. I had a young person once come up to me and say, "How do you get to be a futurist?" And it turns out you can actually come to this very state, Texas, and in the Texas university system find an undergraduate program and a graduate school program in so-called future studies, how to be better at thinking strategically about the future. But in my case, I learned to be a futurist from this amazing guy whose name was Ed Lindem, and he's been gone since 1982. When I knew him, he was a college president. But before becoming president of the college that I was first a student at, and then a staff member, and later a faculty member, he came to the college direct from the space program, where he had been director of program planning for building Apollo. And he was a founding member of the Professional Association of Futurists. And he was a guy who could really turn a phrase, and one of my very favorite things that he ever said was this: if you don't go far enough back in memory, or far enough ahead in hope, your present will be impoverished. And he used to say, we have this amazing human capacity to remember the past and to learn from it, to anticipate, and not only anticipate, but to dream the future and to learn from that so that we can be more effective and, in fact, be happier here in the present. What a futurist does, and certainly what I've devoted my career to as a futurist, is trying to engage these human capacities to look back and to look ahead and to ask what lessons we can learn for what we ought to be doing right now and how we ought to be living, the kinds of things we ought to be pursuing. To do that, it helps to ask some questions. Now, you can parse this big question, what is your image of the future, into three more specific questions. What is probable in the future? Those of you in this room, most of you I know, business owners. What is probable in the future? What are the things that are coming toward us that we ought to be paying attention to, that we ought to be trying to get ready for? Second question, what is possible in the future? What's outside the boundaries of the way we usually think about our business? Which, if we gave ourselves permission to think about it, might enable us to see things in some new ways. Among the more fun questions I'm asked, as illustrated on the screen, is, so whatever happened to those flying cars? How come we don't have those yet? That's thinking outside the boundaries of how we would approach personal transportation. It turns out, by the way, there's an aging engineer outside of Sacramento, California, He's got a publicly traded company called the Moeller Sky Car Company. And you can go buy stock in his company and you can place an order for your personal flying vehicle, which he says he'll sell to you for the price of a luxury automobile about the year 2020. It'll take off vertically, it'll fly 350 miles an hour, and it'll land horizontally. All of that turns out is quite technologically feasible to do. If you could get past the regulatory issues and the noise abatement issues and so on, you could do that. He's thinking outside the boundaries. He's asking not just what is probable in the future, but what is possible. But the most important question you might ask is one that for you starts with a blank piece of paper. As you think about your own business, not just what is probable that I'm going to try to get ready for, or what is possible that would be kind of fun to play with, but what is preferred. And my old mentor, Ed Lindemann, used to say the first two questions are worth exploring, but it's that last question, what is my preferred future? That is the most important question and the whole reason to spend time examining the future, so that you can answer that in the most effective way for yourself, for your family, for your store or for your group of stores, for your community, or for this whole integrated operation called Ace Hardware. What is our preferred future? And if you can answer that question, the really wonderful thing, and the thing that I try to talk about in my book, is that it gives you a way to fold the future back on the present and see more clearly what you ought to be doing next week when you're back home, that you might not otherwise be doing. The whole reason to pause even for 45 minutes and think about the longer term future is not so that you can actually figure out what the future is going to be, and it's not so that you can figure out what you're going to be doing 5 years from now or 10 years from now. No. It's so that you can fold an enhanced understanding of the future back on the present and see more clearly the kinds of things that you ought to be doing right now. Let's talk about two brands and their approaches to the future and how they remember the past. This happens to be the Ace Hardware store that my wife and I were thrilled when it opened up a couple of years ago, about a mile from our house in Kirkland, Washington, a suburb of Seattle, because it meant that we no longer had to go fight the big boxes, which are easy to get into, but very hard to get out of when you want to accomplish something quickly. And sure enough, this particular Ace Hardware embodies all of the things that you're so proud of. Family-owned, very much of a family feel, a customer service orientation when you're in the store. By the way, it is one of those stores where all the employees walk around with a little headset. And you pretty much can count on somebody being there in about 30 seconds wherever you are in the store. If you need something and knowing where it is, or being able to ask through their headsets, which seemed a little bit of overkill to me when I first came in the store, although we're in Microsoft territory, and I thought, well, maybe they're really trying to communicate to the Microsoft type person that we're high-tech too. But turns out it actually is a pretty useful tool, because you'd be surprised how many times the person that I'm talking to has said, I'm not quite sure about that. They speak into their headset, and 10 seconds later, they know what to do or where to go. And so that's our store. We're there all the time. Next to it is Starbucks, another famous brand. By the way, notice that little thing on the Starbucks roof does happen to be solar cells that Starbucks installed on that particular store, a little important later in my presentation. This is an interesting Starbucks. I was sitting in it last week with a family friend. Our kids went to school together, and he just golden parachuted out of Nintendo, where he was vice president, senior vice president for marketing at Nintendo. Got Marketer of the Year in the United States last year for their efforts at marketing the Wii, the new game system. And he and I were sitting in this store having a conversation about his future. He's only 55 years old, and he's just golden parachuted out because they moved marketing to New York, and he didn't want to go. So he's kind of wondering what to do next. But we're sitting there talking about Starbucks. And it was that very evening that Starbucks was shutting down the stores for 3 hours, as Howard Schultz, having taken the company back over again, was going to start the project to try to reinvent Starbucks and, in a sense, bring it back to the future. Now, we're big fans of Starbucks in Seattle. We're quite proud of it, as a matter of fact. We kind of feel like we own it. But we go back far enough to remember that when you walked into a Starbucks store, it felt like you were walking into someplace special. It had a kind of European ambiance to it. You could smell the coffee. It felt kind of exotic, even something different than we're used to in America. It felt cozy. It felt special. And then Starbucks grew, and Howard bought the basketball team and kind of went off and did some other things. And now when you walk into a Starbucks, you feel, as my friend, this guy from Nintendo America, said to me, he said, now look at this store that we're sitting in. This store feels like we're sitting in a cafeteria. And I thought, that's it. When you walk into a typical Starbucks today, you have the feeling that you're entering into a factory assembly line and sitting down in a cafeteria, rather than in some place special. Now, whether Mr. Schultz will be able to recapture that old feeling of Starbucks, I'm not quite sure. Hopefully the answer to that will be yes. You've been able to maintain that sense of place that you've all been so proud of. And in fact, the videos that we just saw were very descriptive of the literal award-winning nature of the place that you've created. What will be the story in the future? If you get the story wrong, you're likely to end up on the cover of Fortune magazine. It's another answer to the question of why spend some time thinking about the future. Everybody would like to be on the cover of Fortune magazine, but not necessarily this cover. It's a famous cover from 1993, and on the cover are 3 dinosaur shapes. If you're close enough, have sharp enough eyesight, you can notice that the 3 dinosaurs have names, and their names are Sears, IBM, and General Motors. And in 1993, the Fortune writers were writing a serious article asking, have these 3 companies become dinosaurs, literally in danger of going extinct? Ironically, exactly 30 years before, in 1963, the famous management writer Peter Drucker named the 3 best managed companies in the history of the world. And their names were Sears, IBM, and General Motors. 30 years later, Fortune was asking, are they going to go away? Now, each has worked very hard since 1993 not to be a dinosaur, with varying degrees of success. You could tell me which one you think has done the best job and which one you think has done the worst job, but that really is the reason to stop from time to time, even though we don't have much time, even though we own a small business and we think that long-range planning is for the big businesses or for somebody else to do. You need to stop from time to time and ask, what lessons can we learn from the future? Because the future creates the present. The image of the future that you have, the future you're trying to get ready for, the future you're trying to avoid, the future you're trying to create, tells you some very important things about the things that you ought to be doing with your employees and with your products and with your services right now, right here today. The future, it turns out, contrary to popular opinion, is not a mystery. We think of it as being unpredictable, out of our control. We often say things like that. But it's really not that mysterious. With just a little bit of effort, you can discover some very important lessons from the future. If you look at demographic dynamics, or technology advances, or the environmental and energy issues that are coming to the foreground, or the economic uncertainty that we face, as we heard just a few minutes ago, or consumer and brand trends. And for the next few minutes, I'd like to walk through these key trend areas. The first set, demographics down through economics, you can think of as the macro trends, the mega trends that you might have read about years ago in a book by John Nesbitt. Consumer and brand trends, I'm going to bring it back home a little bit more down to earth and a little bit more immediate as to what's really happening in the consumer space and in the brand space right now. But I want to just share with you some stories about the future. Some of them will be mere entertainment. Others will be important lessons for you. Some you'll think, wow, that sounds like science fiction. Others you'll think, well, I know all about that. I've heard of that before. In fact, we're already doing something about that right here at Ace Hardware. The future is not a mystery. And yet, it's surprising how fast things can come at us. There's a company that associate with from time to time in Amsterdam. It's called Trend Watching. You can buy their materials, by the way. And they study immediate consumer trends, and they're very clever at it. They come up with lots of great ideas. And one of the things they've done recently is to go out in the street and shoot some videos of consumers talking about different things. And this is a really fun little video, which I thought would illustrate the power of thinking about the future, but also how fast things can come at us if we're not really paying attention to the future. So I'll just start the video and get out of the way. This is what they asked New Yorkers in 2004.
No, I don't.
No.
No. No.
No.
Have I heard of what?
That's foreign to me, but if you could bring it here to New York, I certainly will check it out.
Blogs. Ah, yes.
Blogs? Yes, I've heard about them.
Sure, I've heard.
Blogs? Yes. Yes, I have.
Well, I have heard about them, but I don't do them.
Yes, but I don't do blogs.
I read blogs.
No, I read, but I don't have a blog.
Read some of my friends' blogs.
I have my own blog and I write for another bigger blog and I read lots of blogs. Yes, I write. I have my own blogs and I write every day.
Blogs, yes, I have one.
Isn't that great? Love that video. And it illustrates how fast things can happen, but it also begins to give us some hints at the first big trend area that I want to talk about, which is the shape and nature of the population, demographics, the most predictable aspect of the future. Late 1970s, I was and my wife were debating whether to have kids and when to have kids, and I was in a supermarket one day, and it was a classic scene in a supermarket, young mother, two very unruly young kids, one in the cart, one trailing along, wailing, wanting this, wanting that. She was trying to control them, get through the checkout line with her full cart of groceries, and being a little bit overly forward that day, I leaned over to her at some point and I said, "Excuse me, I hate to interrupt, but if you had to do it all over again, would you have kids?" She thought for a second and she said, "Yeah, not the same ones." Okay, full disclosure, that was actually an old laughter is the best medicine from Reader's Digest. It didn't actually happen to me, but it would be fun if it had. Kids, population groups. It's fun to think about them, and it's important to think about them when you think about customers and when you think about employees. Classically, we divide the population into four groups. The traditional population born before 1946, they're still around in the year 2020. 75 years old and older. The baby boom generation, a lot of us in this room are baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. We're still around. In fact, we're still pretty young, age 56 to 74. Most of us, it turns out, will actually still be in the labor force in the year 2020. Generation X, that somewhat smaller group that followed the baby boom, born between, let's say, about 1964 and about 1980. I get a kick out of thinking of that group being 40 to 55 years old. I don't know why that seems kind of funny to me, but it's just fun to think of Generation Xers being in late middle age. But it's the next two groups that are really intriguing. The Millennial Generation will now be 20 to 40 years old when we get to the year 2020, born since about 1980 up till about the year 2000. And then there's the post-millennial group, which doesn't even have a name yet, and they're 1 year old to 19 years old when we get to the year 2020. What do we know about these groups? Why is it important? Well, let's start with the age wave. Let's start with those traditionals and with those aging baby boomers. This is a classic pyramid population chart, which starts in 1950 and goes out to the year 2050. It'll replay more than once, so you'll get to watch it a couple of times. Classically, populations existed in a pyramid, if you'll look at me. It had lots and lots of young people at the bottom and very few old people at the top. Historically, people lived to be 65, but they were relatively rare. Today, it's very common to live to be 65. In fact, listen to this. Of all the people in the world, in all of history, who ever lived to be 65 years old, 2/3 of them are alive in the world today. If you live in Florida, nearly 20% of your population is over 65, but in the most states in this country, your state probably, around 10 or 12% of the population are over 65. So if you walk around the streets, about 1 out of every 10 people you see should be over 65. But in the year 2020, in state after state after state, according to the Census Bureau, 37 states altogether, as much as 20%, and in some states 25% of the population will be over the age of 65. Because today, we are 1,030 days away from the moment at which the first baby boomer turned 65. And then you have 60 million people turning 65 over the next 15 years. And then when you're in the year 2020, you walk around your town, 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of every 5 people you see is over 65. What does that mean? Think about the products in your store. Think about your employees. I want to talk, for example, about the aging of the home. People are going to be very interested in how to make their homes more livable now that I'm older. They're going to be doing the kinds of things that you see on the screen: wider hallways, ramps, slopes, contrasting steps, which might mean simply painting the steps, rocker light switches, easy tools. Quick story, last time I was in my local Ace Hardware last week, we're preparing my mother, who's 87 years old, to move from her house she's lived in for 40 years to a retirement community. She lives in Portland, Oregon. She's coming up to Seattle. She wanted a little toolbox. So my wife and I went and we stood in front of the tool rack in the Ace Hardware store, and we looked at the tools and tried to ask which of these tools would really be good if you have 87-year-old hands. This particular wrench, or pliers, this particular pliers, nope, crappy handles for an 87-year-old. This one over here, a little better. I think we'll get that one because it's perfect for somebody who is elderly aged. More and more, as an owner, you're going to be looking at your goods and asking, which of these are really appropriate for an aging population? How can we stock things that are better suited to that aging population, and so on? That's the kind of question you'll be asking. Now, it isn't, oh, by the way, I just wanted to add this last point. I'm around the construction and tradespeople a lot, home builders, and one of the great challenges they're going to face is how to downsize the house and make it cheaper. Because in the economy that we're moving into and the retirement phase we're going to be moving into, it's going to be important to figure out how to do that. Somebody's going to crack that nut, and whoever does is going to do really well in the home building industry in comparison to the kinds of homes we've been building recently. But it isn't just an aging population that's interesting when we look at demographics. There's also the emergence of the next generation, the so-called Millennial Generation. Let me ask in this room, if you'll look around, how many in this room were born since 1980? If there's anybody in the room born since 1980, would they stand up, please? There's very few. I would expect only a few. Okay, thank you. Just a few. This is the next generation coming. And the very, very best phrase to describe them is the digital native generation. Why? Well, quite obviously, they're the first generation to grow up not just with computers, but with the internet. And so they approach all of life's activities, like these kinds of activities, differently than the rest of us do. The rest of us in the room who did not stand up, by the way, are digital immigrants. We might be quite skilled with the computer age and the cell phone age and so on, but to us it's always the new thing. Whereas to the digital native or the millennial generation, it's the normal thing. This is the way that life has always been. So if they're thinking about communicating or sharing or buying and selling, they're thinking about using the net. Virtually every activity they do starts in some way on an electronic network. Maybe with a search at Google, maybe with an instant message to or from somebody, maybe with a visit to a blog, like my daughter's friend's blog, which is becoming one of the leading home design blogs. She got a little design degree. Started a little blog. More and more people read it. She just roams stores and says, here's a really interesting thing if you're doing some work on your home. This generation starts there. It isn't an add-on. This is the way they live their lives. And they are the next generation of employees that are already in the door as your entry-level employees, and they will take the technological revolution beyond what you and I imagine as employees, as buyers, and so on. They will particularly engage the next set of technologies. One of the things that's happening is that the net, the internet, the World Wide Web is becoming more than just a textually based tool to being a visually based tool, that is, a video based tool. Some years ago I got to work at the University of Washington at a lab, and they work on so-called virtual reality or augmented reality technology. Imagine that you could put on a set of glasses, something like my reading glasses, in this very room, and through these glasses we could all see each other, but we could also see a computerized reality. That's called augmented reality. And this computerized reality would be a little laser device that paints an image directly onto your eyeball, a three-dimensional color image that enables you to see things that aren't really there while you're also seeing the world that is really there. And when that is reality in 5 or 10 years, our communications world will look like this.
The principal interest of our lab is in enhancing remote collaboration. Current video conferencing technologies cannot fully express non-verbal cues, and remote communication suffers as a result. Hence, our main application is for video conferencing.
Hi, I'm here for the audition.
Okay, and what's your name?
My name is Joe West.
Okay, Joe, could you tell me something about your previous acting experience?
Yes, I was...
Our system realistically introduces the content into the real world together with appropriate 3D sound, which solves many of these problems.
I was the part of the donkey. It was a great role.
We also consider augmented reality interaction with a collaborator in a virtual environment. We can use the tangible card marker to pick the collaborator up and move him aside. We can change the virtual environment by turning over pages in a book, and then we can replace him. We have developed these tangible interaction techniques into a game. We use a marker to try to drop objects onto his head. The collaborator in the virtual environment attempts to jump out of the way in real time. We hope that you've enjoyed this video.
Isn't that great? Now, I don't know whether that'll ever be commercialized. It was a really nice invention. But what it does suggest is that the information technology world will become richer and more capable of doing more things for us and with us as we go through the next 5 or 10 years. No big mystery there. You have programs going on, which we heard referred to just a little bit earlier, in inventory management. When my wife and I, for 3 years, owned a small retail store a few years ago, the best thing that happened to us is when a Microsoft person walked in the store one day and said, "Would you like to be one of 3 beta test sites for the Microsoft small store point-of-sale inventory management system?" My wife, I was kind of the silent partner in that store. My wife was really the owner-operator. She leaped at that, and looking back at that experience, said it was the best thing that happened to be adopted by Microsoft and to learn about how to truly manage inventory using the most sophisticated tools available for a small store. In fact, she said if we'd have had that when we started, life might have been a little bit different. It was an interesting experience that we had doing that little enterprise for 3 years. And we learned that it was very much about really good inventory management. The better you can do with that, the more ahead that you'll be, and the tools are going to be there. But that's not the only kind of technology which is shaping the future. Another technology that you probably don't know anything about, but I think it's the most exciting of all of them, is called nanotechnology. Raise your hand really high if you know what I mean when I say nanotechnology. A few people, very good. It's a technology that actually is going to begin changing our lives, even though we don't know much about it. In some ways, it's just a fancy word for chemistry. It means that now we have the capability not just of seeing atoms and molecules, but of manipulating matter at the level of atoms and molecules. So that you can grab individual molecules and put them together and make unique things that have never existed before, like these solar cells that you see on the screen. This is a company called Konarka, and they've created a particular chemistry that enables them to load solar cells into an inkjet-like printer and print solar cells onto a plastic substrate and run 18,000 feet of them a day. They have competing companies developing these. They're just beginning to go on the market. The first commercial sales were made a couple of months ago in December. And what it means is that 3 or 5 years from now, it may not just be that Starbucks store with those classic solar cells on it. It may be more and more of our stores that have installed solar energy as a way of economizing our use of power, because these kinds of solar cells are as efficient as the classic old glass and silicon ones, but they're cheaper to make, and we'll be making hundreds of thousands, even millions of miles of them 3 to 5 years from now. The first big fabrication plants are being built right now. Another macro trend area has to do with the environment. I don't intend to make a political statement. This is a very interesting set of pictures that is taken each September by an agency of the US government. It's a composite of a lot of photos that shows ice in the Arctic in September, when there is the least ice left, because the ice melts in the summer. And so it's a convenient time to measure how much ice is in the Arctic. And the picture on the left is from September 5, 1979, and on the right, this past September 2007. Notice how much less ice there is. By many measurements, the Earth is sort of melting beneath our feet, and this becomes an important economic opportunity to those of us who sell goods and services, and I'll come back to that. What to do? If the environment is changing, what should we do? Well, we've got to start inventing new things. Out of the field of nanotechnology has come a development called Nano Batteries. I met the CEO of this company based in Reno, Nevada, last year. The company is called Altair Nano, and they've discovered they're a descendant of a mining company. And they had a compound which went into white paint. It made pure white pigment. It's called lithium titanate. High-end white paint used this. But somebody figured out that the particles in this high-end white pigment formed perfect nanospheres that conducted electricity if they were used in the right way. And somebody experimented and put it on one of the two poles on a lithium-ion battery, the kind of battery you have in your laptop computer. And something almost magical happened. Instead of that battery being capable of being recharged 500 times before it wears out, it can be recharged 15,000 times before it wears out. You can put together a pack of these batteries to power an entire automobile, and you can recharge that pack in between 4 and 10 minutes. So you can pull into your home, or you can pull into a service station, plug the car in, and between 4 and 10 minutes later, drive back out with a full load of power. They're driving experimental cars all around the world. They're working with 5 different automobile companies. I don't know that they'll make it. They're not sure that they'll make it as an enterprise, but if they do, it will begin to change the automobile industry, and it will mean that the future will sound like this. All you hear is the tires on the gravel and the wind whistling through the trees. I got to drive that vehicle in Reno last summer. 0 to 60 like you wouldn't believe, because battery power has very high torque. And that could be the future that's coming. But that's just one of the kinds of economic opportunities. In terms of our customers and the kinds of services and products we might provide them, one of the things they're going to be more and more interested in is conservation. It turns out in the United States, we improve our conservation ability about 1% per year. If we doubled that, which would not be that hard to do, an increase of from 1% to 2% would mean, if we could do that for 100 years and level the world population at 9 billion people, we're at 6 billion today. That 9 billion people could live at a European standard of living using half the energy we expend today if we just improve conservation that much. And believe me, you probably already have and will have more and more customers walking in the door asking you to help them figure out how to save a little bit of energy in their homes, even though they've already been doing that. In other words, they're going to be asking you for ideas and tools for greening their home. 22% of the electricity used in the United States is used on lighting. How well are you helping people relight their homes? Or developing integrated controls, or thinking about better hot water heating, or solar and on-demand kind of energy, or rooftop solar, or passive energy approaches, or simple technologies for better conservation. The last trend area, macro trend area that I want to mention, then I want to take a look at our consumer trends, is this one. I wish that I could say that the headline on this slide would be economic smooth sailing. But we already heard a warning, and we all know, walking in the door this morning, that the years ahead, the next year or two or three, depending on which experts you read, are in fact likely to be relatively turbulent. Rapid innovation and technology convergence means new stuff happening, old stuff becoming obsolete. The spending wave will begin to wane as baby boomers age and spend a little bit less money, and the population coming up behind them, Generation X, is somewhat smaller. Luckily, we live in a global population, and China and India are indicators of a burgeoning consumer movement all around the planet. And as a large enterprise of Ace Hardware, of course, you're looking all over the world for where there are consumer markets as well as producer markets for you to be a part of. But the big issue that we face, of course, here in the United States is the one in the upper right, the debt drag. And we've just done some things in the last 7-8 years that mean that we have a bigger debt load than we might otherwise wish that we had. And it's coming on consumers, and it's coming on businesses, and it's coming on government. And it means that it's going to take some time to work out of the debt-related issues that we've gotten ourselves into. Now, the owners that we saw in the video, correctly, it seems to me, point out that your kinds of businesses are in some ways kind of insulated from some of those problems, because it may mean that your customers are less likely to be trying to move into a larger house, and instead figuring out how we could do some small, affordable things to improve the home that I'm living in, to keep it up better or to improve it, like the little dining room remodel project that my wife and I have done over the last couple of weeks, which basically involves some paint and some wall hangings and so on, just to spruce up the home. And we've decided we're going to stay right here. We no longer have any ambition to move up to another bigger place. We're going to figure out how to keep gradually improving this place that we live in. I think I'm a leading indicator of what aging baby boomers are going to be doing as we go through the next 15 years. In fact, I'll bet you $10,000 that I'm a leading indicator that that's going to be a major consumer movement. The silver lining, as we look ahead to the economy, is this, as summarized by my friend Mark Anderson from an organization called Strategic News Service. It's such an amazing time to be alive. Everywhere you turn, you can find some opportunity in ways and amounts that go far beyond what was true 30 years ago. The next 20 years will see a logarithmic increase in businesses to create, in new discoveries, and in things that can be done, like sophisticated inventory management, by the way, that could never be done before. And that's the silver lining. And now let's spend just a few minutes looking at consumers and the future before I conclude. This is where I want to bring it home, and not so long-term, not so big picture, not so 30,000 feet, but more like 1,000 feet and next year. What are some consumer trends that I think you could, if paid attention to, use to enhance your own bottom line? Well, the organization called Trend Watching likes to use some very clever terms, and I've borrowed some of their terms with their permission. Really real, eco-embedded, branded brands, brand butlers, best of the best, upgrade anything, DIFM, MIY, minipreneurs, retail renaissance, e-commerce in which we try things, and then finally I want to conclude by asking, what is your story? I'm just going to say 30 seconds or so about each of these. Really real. Customers all around the world, but particularly here in the United States, are looking for things that seem real and not artificial. And among the things that they want to be real is what you're proud of, which is real customer service provided by real people who really know what they're talking about. And if they have an experience that is not really real, they have tools available to them to make sure everybody else knows. There was an old saying in marketing and advertising that if a customer has a bad experience, they will tend to tell 10 or 11 other people about their bad experience. If they have a good experience, they will tend to tell 2 or 3 other people about their good experience. But something has happened with the millennial or digital native generation. Have you noticed that they can't go more than about 5 minutes without some kind of a message coming into their device and another message going out? Hang out with your 20-something kids. We have 3 kids in their 20s. And 5 minutes is probably the maximum amount of time that goes by. And some recent studies have shown that because they are so connected to such a wide network of people that when they have a good experience or a bad experience in a store, somewhere between 18 to 25 people know about it almost instantly. Not 3, not 10 or 11, but 18 to 25 people are instantly told, and they might even put it on YouTube. What's the last time you Googled YouTube or went to YouTube and searched for Ace Hardware and tried to see if there's anything about your Ace Hardware store showing up on YouTube? You might be surprised what you find there. In fact, I'll guarantee you'll be surprised. I did a little looking at YouTube for stuff about Ace Hardware. You'll find it kind of entertaining. Second consumer trend, eco-embedded. Remember those pictures of the ice in the Arctic? There is a generation, and there is a large group of customers increasingly concerned about the future of the environment. And they're interested in eco-friendly products. This is a very interesting one, by the way. This is a Brazilian gas station company that's combined with MasterCard to create a carbon zero credit card. Every time you use this credit card at the gas station will calculate how much carbon, the amount of gallons you've purchased, is going to throw out into the atmosphere, and then will devote some of their bottom line to carbon offsets to decrease the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which will, for the eco-conscious, mean I'm more likely to go to that gas station. In this country, I don't know if you're using plastic bags, but cities are beginning to ban plastic bags. We generate about 500 billion plastic bags in this world each year. 80% of them are used in the US and in North America, and only 1.5% of them get recycled. 5 years from now, nobody here will be using plastic bags anymore, I don't think. But it might be something, if you want to think about it, to start saying, hey, we don't use that anymore. And advertise that and let people know who are interested in this kind of consumer movement that we're on the leading edge of that movement. Another consumer trend, branded brands. People are looking for a respected brand to attach to my brand. So Norelco combines with Nivea to produce a combination shaver and cream that puts 2 well-respected brands together. Or Bosch and Kraft and Starbucks combine to make a coffee maker and little packets of coffee and so on. That's a convenient kind of coffee maker, and they're trying to take their brand and attach other brands to it and strengthen both brands or all 3 brands because they're working together. Brand butlers. Brands are looking for all kinds of places to be visible. In fact, I want to ask, who was responsible for my Hyatt room key? This is a great example of a brand butler. What does a butler do? A butler serves you things. A brand butler serves up the brand in places where you don't expect to see it, to remind you of the brand. So when I got to my room at the Hyatt last night, in fact, I actually didn't notice it last night, I noticed it this morning, I pulled out my key and I realized, oh my gosh, it says from a simple to a fabulous finish, Ace Paints. I don't know if you noticed. And on the back it says Ace is the place for paint. Right there on my room key. So I don't know who in corporate, I presume somebody dreamed that up. Brilliant. It's a great example of a brand butler, finding some place to remind people of the brand. Another one, best of the best. Some of us are old enough to remember when air travel was a luxury, or tropical fruit year-round were luxuries, or computers were the luxuries of just a few people. Luxuries over time become necessities. If you want to do a little investigative work to ask, as you walk around the floor, the trade floor, the show floor here over the next few days, ask, what am I seeing here that was a luxury yesterday? Because it's the kind of stuff that people really want. They want it in an affordable way, but they love to buy something that's now a necessity, but they remember when it was a luxury, and so it's so cool to have it right now. One generation's indulgence is the next generation's necessity. Upgrade anything is a consumer trend. These are some great pieces of equipment from Samsung, a washing machine, and two personal printers that you would be proud to put out in a visible space in your home. Smart producers are upgrading everything. And one of my challenges to you would be to go back to your store or to walk around the show floor and to ask, what is one thing, one product, or one service that I could upgrade in the next 6 months? Particularly if I could upgrade it in a way that would be visible to my customers, that they would say, wow, that's better than it was 6 months ago. And I will guarantee you that virtually every product and every service in your store can be upgraded if you give it a little bit of thought and you search hard enough for who's got the upgrade available to you. Upgrade anything is a consumer trend. Unfixing is a trend that means getting rid of fixed things and fixed places and moving into do it for me. We're all familiar with the do-it-yourself world. In fact, you've thrived on the do-it-yourselfers for a long, long time. But I believe that as the baby boomers hit this 65 years old in 1,030 days, and then move through their 60s into their 70s and into their 80s, more and more of them, a surprising number of them, are going to be interested in do it for me. And some people, maybe yours, some companies, maybe yours, are going to figure out how to create micro businesses in the do it for me world, which literally means taking that single entrepreneur contractor who goes out and does things for people and making them part of your family in a way that you can upgrade their quality, guarantee a certain level of quality, and also develop a business stream that's a little bit more regular for that person by creating micro businesses in do it for me. And that's a big trend that's coming. Out on the horizon a little bit, this one's just kind of fun to think about. I just wanted to show you this. It's a picture of a desktop factory. You can actually go online and order this. It isn't quite available yet, but you can order it for $5,000. And it's literally a computer-assisted machine that will make plastic things. And you can buy a design, plug it into the machine, and create your own plastic stuff. Now, quite exactly what plastic stuff somebody's going to want to make at home, I'm not quite sure, but a couple of days ago I was in Long Beach talking to an international shipping conference. And I was talking with somebody from Sony afterwards. And he said, we actually do think that there will come a day when we ship designs and localities, maybe an Ace Hardware store will make the things in the store. That you'll have a vat of raw materials, you'll have a do-it-yourself desktop factory, and a certain number of the things that you sell you might actually make in the store on demand, rather than putting it in a truck and driving across country. We think that's coming, this guy said. And it'd be really an interesting trend to watch for. Minipreneurs are your new competition. I've been trying to figure out how you could make them part of your co-opetition or make them part of your family. But one of the things that I might do if I was a store owner would be pretty regularly go on Craigslist, which is the most popular of the online selling tools among the young generation. I would be regularly going on Craigslist and searching for all of my best sellers in the store and seeing how widely they're available on Craigslist, what they're selling for, and so on, so that I might be able to calibrate my own offerings to what's happening out there in the world of minipreneurs. There is a retail renaissance going on worldwide. It may be a little bit less important to you, but there's one thing that I wanted to mention. We thought of the online sales world potentially as replacing stores. That turns out not to be true. And in fact, all around the world, people are interested in really interesting and exciting places to shop. If I was sitting in the shoes of some of you, particularly multiple store owners, and asking where to next. I'd be watching for news like in the business page this morning here of the Dallas Morning News. Jerry Jones, some of you know who Jerry Jones is, the Cowboys owner, announces plans for a 500-acre town center in the town of Prosper, outside of Dallas, somewhere here. A 500-acre town center. I'd be watching for the most important real estate movement of the next 10 to 15 years in the United States, which is the emergence of town centers and urban villages. Anytime I saw an announcement of a suburban town center being built or an urban village being recreated in an older city, I'd be zeroing in on that as a potential location. Why? 1/3 of potential home buyers were recently, in a recent survey, said they're not interested in the big McMansion suburban driving necessary kinds of developments that are being built. 1/3 said that going ahead, they would much prefer to live in a neighborhood from which and in which they can walk to most of their necessities, including the Ace Hardware store that my wife and I walk to more often than we drive to it, because it's 1 mile from us and there's a Starbucks next door, so we can have a nice 1 mile walk, get a cup of coffee, pick up a couple of things, not so much that we can't carry it, walk on back home. 1/3 of potential home buyers say that's how they want to live in the future. I would definitely be looking at a retail renaissance in urban villages and in so-called town centers, these sorts of recreations. Now, it could be that these things are very popular because so many of us in this room are kind of the Disneyland generation. And whenever you were at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, you felt very nostalgic when you were on that old Main Street. And we're literally recreating those main streets all across the country because it's the kind of place that people want to live in. An e-commerce trend that's interesting that I may have some application to you is e-commerce goes beyond just being able to buy and sell things online to being able to try things online. Now, if you were selling clothing, you might be setting up these kinds of kiosks where people can put in an avatar and then try the clothing on and see what they look like in it. But as I thought about e-commerce going ahead for you, how many things could your customers try online before they show up at the store? Could they try paint colors? Could they try out tools? Could they try out things by watching short little videos, for example, on YouTube that your young employees at the store create? This is how you use this thing. And put it up on YouTube and people will find it and they can actually try your store out before they're there. That's a way of thinking about e-commerce. What would be your future story? Not just of Ace Hardware as a large enterprise, but of your particular store or set of stores. When you look at the future, what do you see coming? What is probably going to happen that you're going to try to get ready for? What's outside the boundaries? What's possible in the future that you would like to think about? What's preferred? What can you learn from the future? As you spend the next couple of days here at the show, one of the questions you might ask is, what is something that I'd like to learn about in the next 6 months or so? How is it that of all the futurists in the world, Alvin Toffler, Faith Popcorn of the Popcorn Report, and so on, how is it that I own Futurist.com? How did that happen? The most important piece of real estate that I've ever owned, for sure. Here's how it happened. I got interviewed for a job one time. It was a consulting job. And in the interview, I was asked, what have you learned in the last 6 months? Tell us something that you learned in the last 6 months. I had to come up with an answer. I did. The follow-up question made all the difference. The follow-up question was, what do you plan to learn in the next 6 months? And I had to think really fast. It was about 1990. So I thought, and I said out loud, I said, I'm going to learn how to get on the internet and use it in my business. I had been studying the internet, but I hadn't used it in my business. I did not get the consulting job. Somebody else got the consulting job. But I followed through on my threat. And I literally went to a community college. I signed up for a class on doing DOS-based email over the crude pre-World Wide Web internet that existed at that time. And while I was in that class, we heard a rumor that there was this new invention called Mosaic, the original web browser, which was going to become a commercial product. And when it was a commercial product, we were told, there would be a place where you could go to register home pages. And it would be valuable for everyone to have a home page. Sometime later, I went to that place where you registered home pages at the time and was stunned to see that no other futurist had registered Futurist.com. So I registered it, and Futurist.org and Futurist.net. And it's become the primary means by which almost all of my work comes to me. Why do I own it? Because I answered this question. What do I plan to learn in the next 6 months? And I followed through. You see, the future is not something that just happens to us. We think of it that way a lot. We think of the future as something out there, it rolls over us, and we just sort of deal with it. But the future is not something that just happens to us. The future is something that we do. And the only question is, what are you going to do to create the future that you want? Thank you very much for having me at your program. Thank you.
Glenn, give Glenn a big round of applause. Great job. Gave us a little insight into the future. We'd like to in turn present you with this travel bag on your worldwide travels from Ace Hardware. We appreciate the opportunity to get your insight, and I think these guys all understand about thinking about the future. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.